Science is good, or at least science is good till it ain't. And that's what this video is about. The bad boys of science and the work they've done. And yep, well, we all love science. Science has done some pretty weird, even wrong and harmful stuff like injecting a bunch of black men with syphilis. And yep, the Tuskegee experiment is well documented. But I guess you've never heard of a little experiment called Universe 25. And yes, I did say Universe 25 because the implications perhaps were as astounding as the universe itself. But I'm just guessing at that, but the results, well, they were pretty horrific. While the test subjects weren't human, the implications for humanity were horrific. So buckle up and get ready what a bunch of mice taught us about ourselves. The purpose of this study was to understand the effects of overpopulation in a utopian society. By utopian, I mean a bunch of mice were put into an 8x8 box and given everything they needed to live abundant lives. Food, water, safety from predators, and the mice did well for the first couple of 100 days. And then shit took a dark turn when their little community started to collapse. Some males became hyper-dominant and aggressive, even eating other mice. Even though there was plenty of food available, mothers abandoned their own and even attacked their offspring, and a new class of mice emerged. A class of mice that scientists called the beautiful ones. And these beautiful ones avoided all social interaction and did nothing but eat, sleep, and groom themselves. Kind of like kids today. But I ain't going there because I don't believe that's what's actually going on with today's youth. Yet, with that said, the author of this experiment believed the experiment mirrored the potential collapse of humanity, seeing the beautiful ones as the youth who had no gateway to a productive role in society. So maybe that is what is going on. I don't know. Of course, we humans are a bit more adaptive than mice, and there are some flaws that have been pointed out with the experiment. But all in all, I'm not worried about ever having to worry about society collapsing because humans will never live in any kind of utopia. And that is because the rich and powerful will see to that. But if you think it's fine that we do bad, horrible things to little white mice instead of humans, well, know that we have also done some bad shit with humans. That's right, mice weren't good enough. So let's talk about the Milgram experiment in 1961. This experiment included 3 people: the experimenter, who oversaw what was going on, the teacher, who was to punish the third person in the experiment, known as a learner, by handing out varying degrees of electric shocks to the learner. But no, it was all bullshit, and the real test subject was a teacher who was doing the shocking. And the purpose of the experiment was to figure out how far a person would go to harm another person when an authority figure demanded that they do so. In the results, most were punished if told to do so, even without reason. And I'm guessing that's because you and I were taught to respect and obey authority. And it might be time to rethink that bit. And with that said, let's talk about the Stanford prison experiment. The intent of this experiment was to determine the psychological effects of being a guard or a prisoner. A group of 24 men were selected to be either a guard or a prisoner in a mock prison. A mock prison that actually had cells in a closet for solitary confinement. And yeah, those assigned as prisoners were arrested and fingerprinted, stripped of their names, and were known only by a number. Intended to run for a full 2 weeks, this experiment ended abruptly after 6 days because the guards, they became brutal and sadistic, and the prisoners started suffering emotional distress and breakdowns. Of course, like any experiment, there were pros and cons to this one as well, and some consider this experiment nothing but a morality play and not a real scientific experiment. But while the Stanford experiment didn't influence U.S. prison policy by changing any specific laws, it did bring a lot of awareness as well as producing a lot of situational awareness that resulted in things like better training for the prison guards. If the Stanford experiment doesn't bother you, here's one that might. The monster study in 1939 that experimented on 22 orphans from an orphan's home in Iowa. The purpose was to prove that stuttering was a learned behavior as opposed to being biological. The children, aged from 5 to 15, were divided into two groups. The first group were composed of both children who stuttered and those who didn't. This group was given nothing but positive reinforcement, being told their speech was fine. Not so much for the second group, who didn't stutter, but were told their speech was horrible, and were told to never speak unless they could speak perfectly. Of course, the only outcome of this experiment is that the children in the negative group ended up suffering lifelong consequences, including anxiety, low self-esteem, and social withdrawal. This experiment was kept secret till exposed in 2001, and the state of Iowa ended up paying out just under $1 million to what survivors were left from the 1939 experiment, and I'm guessing there was only one or two of them. I do have to say before I close this fine video out, when it comes to experimenting on our fellow humans, I haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg, because our ability to create pain and suffering for others seems to know no bounds. From experiments like the third wave in 1967 to all the shit that the Japanese and Nazis did during World War II, not to mention shit like MK Ultra, that makes you kind of think that maybe we're all monsters. If you've ever wondered about aliens visiting our blue planet, I'm guessing that would be why they might never return for a second visit. And yeah, we probably conducted a few ungodly experiments on those little aliens that stayed a bit more than what they were welcome. And here we are today. You know, humans can be pretty evil to each other, monstrous, in some cases even can outright demons. Man, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if we happened to cross a crashed UFO and there was an alien in there, you think they didn't dissect that sucker? I mean, seriously, even if he was probably still alive. I don't know. The shit that we do to ourselves, the inhumanity that we thrust upon ourselves. And you know, they do it together, not just one or two individuals, they're organized, they are groups of scientists and what have you. I don't know. Those poor aliens that crashed out in Roswellville. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I just think that's funny. But thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. Leave a comment, like. Don't forget to sub if you have not. See ya.